Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Today's video is going to be a review of Prey by Michael Crichton. So this is the second Michael Crichton book that I have read. The other one that I read was Pirate Latitudes, which I have a video for. That was the first video I did, if I remember correctly. But this is the first science fiction book of his that I've read, and I absolutely loved it. I really did. I'm going to do today's review in the same format that I did the 180 seconds review. So hopefully that works out really well, and I guess I'll just jump right into it. First up are my thoughts on the plot. The plot was fantastic. It was fast-moving, it was intriguing. You didn't know what was really going on for most of the book, honestly, for 300 pages or so. And this is a 502-page book. So this is another tome, which looking at it, you wouldn't really think so, and it is smaller, so maybe it doesn't quite count, but the print's also kind of small, so I'm gonna say it counts as a tome, which is, if I'm correct, if I am remembering correctly, that's just a book that's over 500 pages, so this one just barely makes it. But anyway, for the first 300 pages or so, you really don't know what's going on. You kind of do, and maybe that's not even true. Maybe it was 200 pages. There's just so much intrigue and suspense in it. And it is a thriller, so there of course has to be suspense. But for the first 200 pages at least, you really don't know what's going on. And then for another couple hundred pages, you're kind of getting glimpses, but it's really hard to know what is behind it or how it's gonna end. And it keeps going as well, because around page 400, it seemed like they had solved the problem and everything could have been fixed there, it could have been ended there. But there was another 100 pages of the book, and so I had to read on and find out what Michael Crichton was going to throw at us next, what needed to be resolved, because there were 100 pages left. So yeah, the plot was just absolutely incredible, fast-moving, interesting. The prologue right away is super intriguing, hooks you right away. And then the last chapter ties in with the prologue. It's kind of like rewriting it, but with a lot more information, because now we know more. So that was really awesome. I really liked how it started and ended the same way, but also it was so incredibly different, and you went on such an incredible journey throughout it that it was very different. I have kind of a sub-point under plot. I want to talk a little bit about the science, because that's something I did know about Michael Crichton's books, even though I've only read Pirate Latitudes, which of course doesn't have a lot of science in it. It's more of just a historical fiction. But I knew that he included a lot of science into his books, and it is so obvious all throughout this book that Michael Crichton really knows what he's talking about. Sometimes he would explain things and I still wasn't quite sure what was going on. I do really enjoy science. Science is kind of like a mini passion of mine, and I especially love sciences like this, where you're dealing with things that seem super far-fetched and they seem impossible, but there is theoretical science to back them up, and there are theories of how these things could be possible. Some of my favorite things to research are invisibility and teleportation, because there's science behind those theories. There are ways that they could be possible, even if they are super far-fetched, and even if the science would be super difficult. There are ways that they could be possible, and so I love sciences like that, and that's what Prey was all about. It's about nanotechnology, which isn't something I've really ever researched, but Michael Crichton explains everything as he's going through it really well, not in a way where you feel like you're just getting an info dump. It's explained in a way that makes sense, and it's spread out throughout the book. So overall, I was just super impressed with the plot, super impressed with the science behind it. It was so fascinating. I apparently really do love sci-fi when it's done like this. This is my favorite kind of science fiction, where it's really backed up by science. And anyway, yeah, so the plot and the science both get 5 out of 5 stars for me. Super incredible. And so now I will move on to the characters. I don't really have a ton to say about the characters. This isn't a book where you really get attached to the characters as much, because it is more about the science and about the plot, and it's a thriller, so it's more about just surviving than it is, getting to know the characters and having fun characters. But as in Pirate Latitudes, I think Michael Crichton did a great job with these characters. They're all very unique and different. I think I mentioned this in Pirate Latitudes, where there were a lot of main characters. They're not necessarily main characters, but they are important all throughout the story. And so even though they're all very different, it's kind of hard to keep track of them sometimes. So Michael Crichton is very good at giving everybody distinct personalities and distinct traits that let you know who you're talking about. But there's one character that I really can't remember what his traits were or how Michael Crichton introduced him. Bobby. I cannot remember how he was introduced and what was important about him. But that's kind of a minor thing, because it's not confusing. You do know who everybody is, and it's very clear that they're different. And I have only read 2 of Michael Crichton's books, so I don't want to make any huge generalizations all throughout this review. Anything that I say, I'm mostly thinking about this book and Pirate Latitudes. His other books may be completely different, but from what I've read so far, these are things that I'm noticing. So he also introduced the characters in a similar way, where he just kind of tells you, this is the character and these are some things about them, and then you go on. And that's okay in this book because the book is not about the characters. The book is about surviving. It's about Jack mainly, so he is a very important character, and the book is written from his perspective, like he's telling the story, which allowed for some really interesting things. But anyway, it's not a book where you're going to really fall in love with the characters and get to know them over the course of the book. It's kind of like, these are the characters, this is what you need to know about them, now let's get back to the important part of the story, which is what they're running from, what the big problem is. So not a whole lot to say about the characters because there wasn't really, I didn't fall in love with any of them. I did think that the kids were written really, really well because Jack has 3 kids and 2 of them are a little bit older, and just the way that they fight and the way that they interact is just very perfect. I've spent a lot of time around kids, and this kind of stuff really does happen, like all the time. So I thought the kids were written really well. I thought Jack's ideas on parenting were pretty accurate. Not necessarily that his parenting is the way that I would parent, but his thoughts about the kids and about parenting and just the thoughts running through his mind whenever he had to stop a fight or something. I was like, yep, that's probably what a lot of parents think. So I thought the parenting and the kids were really great. I think the characters were all written very realistically. I think he does a very good job with his characters. They're just not characters you're gonna necessarily fall in love with. And then towards the end of the book, it was really interesting. You didn't know who to trust. You couldn't trust anyone really. There is kind of a reason, but it takes a while to find that out. And so you're just stuck not trusting any of these characters and you don't know what's going on. And so just incredible. So the characters, I guess, get a 4 out of 5 for me, just because, like I said, they're not like lovable characters. They're just people, but they were done really well. So I don't know, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. So moving on to the writing. I'm going to make a very bold statement. I'm going to stick to the writing in this book. So I'm not talking about Michael Crichton's writing as a whole because I've only read 2 of his books and I don't really remember what I thought about the writing in Pirate Latitudes. But based on Prey, I would say that Michael Crichton is not a very good writer. Now that's not to say that he's not a good author. I think his stories are incredible. I think the plot of this book was incredible, and he's a best-selling author. He's an incredible author. He's successful, or was successful. So I think he's a very talented author, and he's very, very talented at coming up with plots. But as far as actually writing, as far as sentence structure, and as far as just writing in and of itself, excluding plot and characters and everything else, just sentences. If you're looking at sentences, I wouldn't say he's a good writer. I had a lot of issues with his writing, and it really kind of drove me nuts sometimes. Now, the plot was good enough and intriguing enough that I didn't always think about his writing, and it kind of just pulled me in, and then I got sucked into the plot, and I didn't care about the writing. But there were also many, many times that I got frustrated with his writing because there was no reason to write it that way. So his writing at most gets a 3 out of 5 stars for me. Definitely not the best. If you disagree, you can totally comment down below and let me know. But those are my thoughts based on this book alone. The writing was not great. I said in my written review that his writing was lacking. It was choppy, and that's true. And sometimes that works. Like in a book like this, there are definitely times when you want the writing to be choppy. You want the sentences to feel choppy and repetitive and to add some to the suspense. But as I've said before, you don't want that in an entire book. Even though the book is a suspenseful thriller, you don't need to write the whole book that way. It's like when you have too much of something, it just kind of loses whatever special thing was there in the first place. So that type of writing is meant for certain scenes to make those scenes more impactful, to make them more suspenseful. When you do the whole book that way, it just kind of loses that, and it doesn't help to make any of it more suspenseful. Then you have to rely on the plot and things. So not a fan of his writing. I did think that writing it from Jack's perspective and making him the narrator was really interesting. It led to a lot of interesting things. You don't know everything. You only know what Jack knows. You're learning as he learns. Sometimes he's wrong, and you don't see everything that's going on. You only see what he's seeing. So that was great for making it more suspenseful. Oh, it was also interesting that sometimes Jack would be like thinking basically, but it kind of just sounds like narrating the book, you know, he's telling what's going on. But then a paragraph would get cut off by a character interrupting or by something happening. So that was pretty cool too, because it does make it feel more like Jack is just telling the story, like you're in his head more. So that was really cool, and I thought it was also interesting that he didn't always write all of the dialogue out. He would have a paragraph of somebody's dialogue and they'd be talking to somebody else, but he would imply what the other person's reactions were. So if they're talking to somebody, you know, they might ask a question, say yes, and then continue. So you know that the other character is agreeing, but without the other character explicitly agreeing. So again, very interesting. I do think there were some really cool things about his writing. I just think overall his writing is not the best, but I mean, that's okay because the plot totally makes up for it. A couple of the deaths in the book I totally saw coming. One of them I thought was going to happen earlier. I was like, great, this is getting set up for a death, but that didn't happen. It happened a little bit later. So I did kind of see them coming, but not entirely and not exactly how they would happen. So, and I feel like he kind of had to throw in some deaths to make it seem, to raise the stakes even more. So just a note about those, I guess. I do want to be talking about title tie-ins in these books. That's another section that I'm adding because I love to see how the title ties in with the book. This one was interesting because it tied in really well while also not tying in the best. So it's called Prey, which works great for a thriller because it's intriguing and it's scary. Who's the prey? You know, it's pretty obvious, I think, that like we're the prey if it's a thriller. So in that sense, the title worked really, really, really well. I found myself wondering though if maybe Predator would have been a better title for it, but either way, I think the title tie-in was good enough. Not the best I've seen, I have definitely seen better tie-ins, but it was still pretty good. And that's not really a huge factor in the book. I really do enjoy seeing how titles tie into books, so I figured I would add that as a section in these reviews. So the title tie-in for this one, not the best I've seen, but still pretty good. Now for the content guide. I don't have a lot for a content guide. This is an adult book. It's not meant for young adult at all. It's just an adult book. So there's lots of swearing, which there was also in Pirate Latitudes. There was a lot of swearing, and it can sometimes be kind of crude or raunchy. So yeah, sometimes not really the most comfortable to read, but nothing too bad either. It's just a little bit crude sometimes, and there was a lot of swearing. There's also a really graphic dissection in it, so if you don't like dissecting animals and you don't like hearing about that, that's definitely something to watch out for. There's a pretty graphic dissection, which was gross, but not horrible. And here are my takeaway thoughts. I really, really loved this book. 5 out of 5 stars from me. Even though the writing was pretty bad at times, the plot totally makes up for it. The story was just so incredible. It's suspenseful, it's intriguing. Whenever I picked it up, I had a hard time putting it down. I would read a lot at a time, and I don't normally read a whole lot. But the first day that I picked this up, I read 140 pages. And that was only in a couple hours. I didn't pick it up until the evening, but then I read right through over a fifth of the book. Yeah, it was definitely intriguing. Definitely a story that I loved and definitely keeps you reading. I could have finished this book last night. I ended with roughly 50 pages left. Actually, I think a little bit less. And I've been setting 8 o'clock as my time when I can just chill and do nothing after that. So after dinner until 8 o'clock, I make myself read or do something more productive, and then I can kind of just, rot my brain with TV if I want to. But yeah, by the time 8 o'clock came, I had like 50 pages left, and I could have finished it, and I was tempted to, but it was kind of starting to creep me out, and I was like, all right, I want to just save this for the morning. I'm gonna wait. But not really in a bad way either. It wasn't super creepy. It was just, I kind of got like chills, which is great because it's a thriller. So, it's kind of supposed to scare you a little bit without being too scary. Like, it's far from horror, which is good, but it's definitely a thriller. So yeah, super, super exciting read. If I didn't have other books lined up to read after this, I would just race through all of the Michael Crichton books that I own, which I own at least half a dozen. I've been picking them up because I have a friend who loves Michael Crichton books, and I figured if I don't read them, I can at least give them to her and she can read them, but I'm gonna read them now because the 2 that I've read so far, I have loved. And actually, this is one that I picked up last year sometime, and I read a couple pages and then I put it down and didn't want to read it. I just didn't get into it. I didn't give myself time to get into it. I don't really know why. But as I was reading the first chapter, I remembered certain things. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that conversation, or I remember him thinking that. And then I quickly got to things that I was like, I do not remember this at all. So I really only read a few pages of it when I picked it up last year. I'm so glad that I picked it up again. This is one that my high school principal has been recommending that I read. So I have finally read it. I'm so glad that I have. So thank you so much for that recommendation. That's my takeaway from it. I definitely recommend this book for lovers of sci-fi, for lovers of thriller, because it is both of those things. Science, as I said before, is well thought out. Super obvious that Michael Crichton knows what he's talking about, and it was a fascinating read. I had a hard time putting it down once I'd picked it up. So if you are a lover of sci-fi thrillers, definitely pick up Prey and read it. You won't regret it. If this is your type of book, this is a really great one to read, and probably any other of Michael Crichton's science fiction books. And that is it for this review video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you did down below. Give it a like if you did. Subscribe if you haven't already. And let me know your thoughts down below. Have you read any Michael Crichton books? What are your favorites? If you've read Prey, what did you think about it? I'm really interested to know what people think of his writing. Let me know what you think of his writing. And if you've read Prey and some of his other books, is his writing better in other books? Does it not matter? Do you not care? This is just something that I care about as a writer, I guess. I care about the writing in books. So yeah, please let me know your thoughts down below. I would love to hear from people. I generally get back to comments like within a week at least. Usually sooner than that, just kind of depends on what's going on in my week. And that's all for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope to see you in the next video. Have a blessed day, everyone.